The Switch has been out for too long at this point, but during this time we've seen some mostly really good games come out. As usual for Nintendo, the Legend of Zelda series is one of the big standout names that's been releasing on the console, and there are quite a few of these games on there, some with more mixed opinions than others. With a port, remaster, spin-off, or completely new one releasing sometimes 2 times a year, is Zelda actually good on the Switch? The Switch got off to a really great start when it released with Breath of the Wild. That game's also probably one of the best games on the Wii U. But I really like this game, and I put a lot of time into it when I first got my Switch. Even though this game is one of my favorites on the system, there are some parts of the game that I wish were different. You know, stuff that could have been fixed in a sequel. But these things have a lot to do with the dungeons. One of my favorite parts of the Zelda series is going into dungeons and getting some new items or some new mechanic, and then solving the puzzles where I actually kinda need those things. It just kept the game feeling fresh when I was playing through it, and just made me want to play more. I'm not saying I didn't want to play Breath of the Wild, but the Divine Beasts are some of my least favorite dungeons in the series. They were also honestly ugly as shit compared to other Zelda dungeons, mostly because they just look plain and don't really follow themes that well. The bosses were really fun and different though, and the shrines mostly make up for what I don't like about the main dungeons. The shrines also felt rewarding enough to me that trying to get all of them didn't really feel like that bad of a grind. On top of that, I really like the graphics and visuals. Everything just looks really good and doesn't run too poorly for what it is. But overall, this game is just a really cool game that released at a really good time. Going back to the sequel thing, I'm gonna start off by saying I don't like Tears of the Kingdom nearly as much as I like Breath of the Wild. I don't dislike it, I actually enjoyed my playthrough, but a lot of it just kinda falls short for me. And again, it has to do with the main dungeons. They are definitely a step up for me from Breath of the Wild's main dungeons, but they're just kinda boring. Tears of the Kingdom dungeons are better at following themes and not looking ugly, but gameplay wise, going through them is some of the most monotonous shit ever. You have to go around solving a few puzzles to find some terminals to open up a room to fight a boss. The boss arenas are also kinda just circles placed in the middle of the dungeons. The fights themselves are kinda easy, but I don't really have anything too bad to say about them other than that. Nintendo did a really good job with their designs, and fighting them feels cool and reminds me of fighting older Zelda bosses. I also want to add that the armor and clothes in this game are really fucking cool. And you know, I could talk about the menus and abilities that people seem to absolutely despise, but I actually didn't think they were that bad, except for when I was really far into the game trying to go through the fuse menu. But again, if Breath of the Wild is an 8 or 9 out of 10 experience for me, then Tears of the Kingdom is probably a low 7. Far from a bad game, but there's a lot more that I wish was different about it. Next up, I want to talk about a game that I actually beat pretty recently, so it's still fresh in my mind. That game being Skyward Sword HD. I have a long history with Skyward Sword, and it's definitely in my top 5 Nintendo games. One of the main issues people usually seem to have with the original version is the forced motion controls. But when you're a dumb little 7-year-old, being able to use your Wii remote as a sword is the coolest shit ever. They added the stick control thing in the HD version, but obviously I gotta use the motion controls for the true experience. But this game is honestly just as good as I remember and then some, with some nice needed changes like the stupid description that would pop up whenever you picked up an item, even though you already picked it up before. Skyward Sword HD is really good looking too, and actually runs at a consistent 60 FPS, which I would hope would be the case for a game that's almost 14 years old at the time of this video. I actually still am working on finishing the side content, which this game has a pretty decent amount of. It's just an all-around enjoyable game, and a really good remaster of one of my childhood games, which I always love to see. Literally my only complaints are the price and the features locked behind amiibos. The features are pretty minimal, but these shits cost at least $30, which I don't think is worth being able to teleport into the sky whenever you want. The game is definitely worth it if you want a more traditional 3D Zelda game on the Switch, and if you haven't tried Skyward Sword before, I would definitely recommend it. This next segment is something I just want to get out of the way, mostly because I kinda have a lot to say about it, but a lot of it's kinda bad. I actually really like the Nintendo Switch Online game library thing, but I don't like how Nintendo fell into splitting up their subscription service with the expansion pack. And I really don't like how it's an extra $40 on top of the base subscription. I know as far as gaming subscriptions go, Switch Online isn't that expensive, but it also doesn't give you the same amount of things as other subscriptions like PS Plus and Game Pass. Sure, you get some DLC for a few different games, but you also need the games that are $80 6 years after release. One of the big selling points of the online service is being able to play old games on the NES all the way up to the Game Boy Advance. But let's look at the NES and Super Nintendo Zelda games. They're included just in the base subscription, and they're mostly just alright to me. The only one I really enjoy and see the appeal of is Link to the Past, but the others just feel like something that was good maybe 30 years ago. And I don't think The Adventure of Link is anybody's favorite game. But they started the series, and my dad thinks they're cool, so I don't dislike them at all. Just not my first choice when I want to play Zelda. And they also just kinda lump together Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, so with that is Link's Awakening and the Oracle games. They are pretty fun games, and you might as well give them a try since they come with the cheapest version of Switch Online. and I will touch up on Link's Awakening again later in the video. And then there's the expansion pack. With this you can get games from the N64, the Game Boy Advance, and the Sega Genesis. So with the N64, you can play both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I absolutely love these games, but I can also play them on pretty much any other Nintendo console for free at this point. I can even play them on non-Nintendo theoretically of course, but I guess it is kind of tradition to be able to play these games on newer Nintendo consoles, but like, I still don't know. It's still not convincing me to buy expansion pack, and I'll probably stand on this forever. But let's talk about the games themselves. They are obviously going to be the original N64 versions, which honestly is what I think to be the best versions to introduce to someone who's never played these titles before. And these are games that deserve to be played by everyone at some point, so I guess this is a decently accessible way to do that. Last on this kind of rant thing is the Game Boy Advance, with the only real addition to the Zelda series being Minish Cap, and Four Swords Adventure I guess, if you can find friends willing to play with you. I don't know, that game never really piqued my interest, but it seems like it could probably be fun for a couple hours maybe. But Minish Cap on the other hand is probably one of the most underappreciated Zelda games ever released. It's just fun and the mechanics are really interesting to me, but again you can easily play it on anything else. If you can't tell by now, I really love these games, but I really don't love expansion pack. And since this video is about Zelda on the Switch specifically, I'm gonna say my kind of final verdict is that the NES, SNES, and Game Boy Advance games are an alright experience for the price, but I draw the line at the Game Boy Advance and N64 games. Really great games, but just not the right console to play them on. But that's just my own opinion, and I'm gonna leave it at that. On the same sort of lane as these older Zelda games, there's the Link's Awakening remake. This game is one of those games that kind of feels like a sort of side project, but a really fun one at that. It also sold pretty decently too, and from what I can tell this game is pretty faithful to the original. I haven't actually done a full playthrough of the original Link's Awakening, but I do really enjoy the remake. I'm not 100% sure I would recommend it at full price just because of how short it is, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy my time with it. It kinda does hit every box on the checklist of what makes a good Zelda game, because you got fun dungeons, good bosses, pretty good puzzles, and nothing really overstays its welcome. The game being short also makes it better in a way I guess, but at this point I would still try and maybe look for a used copy if I didn't already own the game. The references to Mario throughout the game is also something that I think is really cool. In the end, I don't have anything too bad to say about the Link's Awakening remake, and I think that it's just another good fun Zelda game on this console. And then there's Echoes of Wisdom, which is probably going to be the last new Zelda game on the Switch. I feel like they could have done a lot more with the concept of actually playing as Zelda, but I don't really know what they would do. But I will say this game looks really good visually, as long as you can get past the super inconsistent frame rate. This is also a problem I forgot to talk about with Tears of the Kingdom. These games are really shittily optimized, and are probably worse for people like me who are playing on a launch edition Switch. I really did try to like Echoes of Wisdom more than I do, but this game just kinda feels boring and tedious. The gameplay kinda does feel like an afterthought, and the entire game itself just kinda feels like Nintendo's last push to get some sales before the release of the Switch 2. I really do want them to revisit a concept like this sometime though. Last up is a quick round where I'm going to talk about the spin-off Zelda games. So on the Switch there are the Hyrule Warrior games, which are just dumb fun. The original came out on the Wii U back in 2014, and Nintendo decided that it was good enough not only to make a definitive edition on the Switch, but to also make a sequel. I like games like Dynasty Warriors alright, and Hyrule Warriors is basically a Zelda reskin of Dynasty Warriors at its core. They are both developed by Koei Tecmo, so this does make sense. The sequel, Age of Calamity, is kinda just more of the same, just with some Breath of the Wild tie-in. Just like the first one, I don't care about the story way too much, but I thought the gameplay was fun enough, especially playing split screen with my friends. That's all I really have to say about the Hyrule Warrior games, but they are pretty fun for a couple hours at a time. And then there's Cadence of Hyrule. This was such a strange, unexpected game when it was announced. Crypta the Necrodancer and Zelda is a really fun collaboration, and they did their thing with this. This game I think is great from what I have played, but if you don't like rhythm games already, it might not really be for you. But if you already like these kinds of games, please try out this game. While it is really short, it is really fun, and the art style is vibrant and cool. That's kinda my quick review on it there. The spin-off Zelda games on Switch are pretty good, and since there's only 3 of them on the system, I feel like they're probably worth checking out. So overall, The Legend of Zelda is a series I've always really enjoyed, and the Switch has some Zelda games that I really love. I am still praying every day for another Wind Waker port, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with what we do have on this console. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like and sub, it would be appreciated. Goodbye.